Okay, everybody, I'm Mike Honeycutt again with Corero Network Security, and I'm really excited. I got two amazing guests today. I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar titled Ensuring Service Availability in Healthcare. And we're going to explore the DDoS threat landscape as we always do, but specifically within the healthcare industry. I've got two great guests, as I mentioned. So I've got Daniel Lakier, Field CISO, Myriad360, and I've got Kevin Werner, System Director of Security Operations at Mainline Health. So I want to give a second first. Thank you guys both for being here, and I'll let you introduce yourself. Daniel, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Kevin.
Sure. I'm Daniel Lakier. I'm the Field CISO at Myriad360. I've been in the industry about 25 years. I've been throughout the supply chain of really IT security in this 25 years. I've been in distribution. I've been with a couple of different manufacturers, sometimes in peon roles, sometimes in senior roles. I've been with a couple of end users, including at the time Fortune 1 organization, where I was one of the key people designing cloud security architecture. But and I've been in integrations. Typically, I find myself in integrators because I like to help people. And while integrators in other areas can do that, I like to be somebody that can change with the times. If there's something better, I like to be able to help my friends, because really, if I've dealt with you for any period of time, we've built a relationship to continue to have the right solutions. So that's me.
Awesome. All right, now to you, Kevin.
Yeah, perfect. Me, I hate helping people, so that's why I'm here. So, Werner, I am Security Operations Director at Mainline Health. I've been here about 4 years. So, my role is functionally anything in the security realm that's non-GRC, right? So network security, endpoint security, you name it. Pretty varied background. Prior to this, worked in financial services, worked in software development and education. I also am an attorney, so very strange background. I've seen a lot of stuff, and here today. Thank you.
That did not come up on your LinkedIn profile.
Oh, yeah.
Look hard enough, but that's awesome. That's a little bit of a curveball there. Well, with that said, I'm going to give you the first question, if that's all right, Kevin. So, when we talk about why DDoS is a board level concern, in the healthcare arena. So, we see that DDoS attacks are no longer just an IT issue, right? Businesses are actually paying attention. Those in the business suite are paying attention. Specifically in healthcare, though, and so I guess my question is, when did you first start noticing an uptick in DDoS attack activity, and what factors do you think are contributing to making this a priority for healthcare organizations today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was shortly after I started, right? I began at Mainline in 2021. Early 2022. Geopolitically, if you want to line it up with the Russia-Ukraine business, I think you can absolutely draw a direct line there. Healthcare represents a very, very soft target with a ton of impact, right? So historically, healthcare was not targeted, which kind of led to almost over-reliance on maybe they'll continue being nice to us. But that ended. Starting about 3-4 years ago, we're absolutely getting teed off on as an industry. What that led to is a quick reassessment of the importance of data security, specifically network security, right? And securing the perimeter and making sure that the bad actors can't bring the organization down. It represents a unique threat for healthcare because there's a direct line towards loss of life, loss of reputation, and loss of revenue, right? In any industry, right? If you go down, you're going to lose money, but the long-term reputational damage that can be done through an attack and lose, having to take your system down or divert patients for a period of time is incalculable, right? So, the industry quickly started wising up and placing an emphasis on this.
Yeah, so you kind of spoke to the consequences there, and so that's matriculated its way up, beyond sort of the IT professional securities, and then so the business leaders up within the healthcare arena are starting to notice this, and so they're essentially saying that we need to allocate budget or resources to providing or finding a DDoS solution.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So you see, you can have internally, right. I think a lot of the focus previously was, internally, making sure your ducks are in a row from patching and that sort of thing. But, if you can just be flooded with traffic and that brings you down, it vastly lowers the barrier of entry towards an attack. Right. So I think I've seen from leadership, right. We need to make sure that potentially the easiest attack that can be perpetrated on us and with the most impact has to be taken off the board.
Great, great. And so, Daniel, I'm interested to get your perspective on this as well, since you work in and around this for quite some time. You work with healthcare organizations such as Mainline. And what trends are you seeing when it comes to DDoS attacks targeting hospitals and medical networks? Does it align with what Kevin is saying?
So it's an interesting question, right? I've been in and around the DDoS area of technology pretty much since 2008. It's been a very big interest area to me, and helped design in 2008 at the time probably the largest custom only DDoS network, and so as time has progressed, I've seen the whole bad actor industry around DOS and DDoS change. In fact, Kevin and I actually met around dealing with this problem, and one of the things I'm seeing change, the attacks have become a lot more targeted. A volumetric attack used to be a volumetric attack. I would take the same attack and send it to many places. But as people started to take the basic precautions that we see in the industry, so most organizations today, especially medical, have some sort of volumetric protection. The attacks are changing where people are actually using targeted attacks. I know that you've probably got this protection, so I'll look at doing a denial of service attack. I'll do an encrypted attack. I'll do a layer 7 attack. Mm-hmm. And so everything that Kevin said is true until there was a kind of an unwritten rule. We try not to. It wasn't perfect. If someone goes and quotes me and says no hospital was ever attacked with the DDoS attack before, that's not true. It was just a lot less. It wasn't the thing that you saw every day. Since 2022, 2023, we've seen a massive uptick and a targeted uptick, and at the same time, what's made it worse is medical institutions have started moving to more and more SaaS-based applications over the last 10 years. So in the past, if I took down your ability to get to the internet, the hospital still had most of the solutions that they needed on premise. I could still do a lot of work without it really impacting anything. Over the last 10 years, medical institutions have moved more and more of their core applications to the cloud and to different SaaS providers. If I take out your ability to get to the internet or your external IP, I take down your ability to save lives.
So can you put this in sort of plain terms? So it's instead of like having a physical medical chart, maybe the doctor's looking at a tablet, right, that now has a patient's medical chart. And because I'm just trying to see somebody who may not be in the healthcare industry so they can understand in a tangible way. We're talking about taking away critical resources or critical information from a physician that could then impact the life.
Exactly. And that's why ransomware, DDoS is not always a ransomware level attack. It is very frequently a ransomware attack in medical institutions. The time to recovery has to be a lot quicker because people die. So they'll use a DDoS attack, request a ransom to stop the DDoS attack, and slightly different. But a hospital group last year was taken down with a ransomware attack, not a DDoS. Or in 2023, I think it was Prospect Medical Group, roughly 16 hospitals, 160 facilities. The ransomware attack took them down for weeks, if not months. Mm-hmm. And a DDoS attack, if used in the same way, you typically wouldn't be that long. But even if you're down for 2 or 3 days, if you can't get to your EMR, if you can't get to your charts and your images, it's a big problem. If I can't get to the EMR to see when last someone took medication, yes, you have physical charts too, and that's actually the fallback. But hospitals don't work like that anymore.
Yeah. So Kevin, are you seeing anything specific, that specifically within your organization, within Mainline, specific attacks that have like speaking to what Daniel just said, do you have any incidences that you can speak to?
Yeah, I mean, prior to my arrival, right, we had, there was a, phishing incident, right, that went wild, the whole thing, right, that kind of spawned up the security program. Immediately after Dan and I worked previously, and we got our DDoS solution spun up, and we're up and running. We caught a pretty large scale attack within a week, and we've seen constant activity in the time since of either reconnaissance or full scale attacks that we've been detecting and shutting down. So there's two things at play here, right? I don't think it was a coincidence a week later we caught an attack, right? Like it's extremely likely that we were being targeted, for a while, right? And they've been poking around and looking for it. But I mean, having that ability to block it, and also just having the visibility now, right? That's not something we had previously, especially on the edge. Understanding what our incoming inbound traffic looks like, from both from like a brute force level and like a layer 7 perspective, extremely eye-opening, and also, had other advantages, even outside of the realm of a DDoS attack, right? Like, if we're under let's say we're being targeted with like a password spray attack, right? Like, we're able to see immediately, like, the volume of the traffic is strange. This isn't a DDoS, right? But we're able to see based on the metrics we've been able to glean from, provider that, hey, like there's something abnormal here. Let's start taking action, right? That's not something we had previously.
That's very interesting. I mean, so how do the protections needed for the healthcare industry, are there any differences, Daniel, that you could speak to, like versus other industries? Is there anything that you can speak to that's different than how another industry would approach protecting their network against DDoS?
I'm not differences. That's a tricky question. Ramifications are really the key to difference. Yeah. There's been, as I mentioned, a lot of organizations have taken the step of having volumetric protection, which is through a SaaS provider. You go, but as you look at how attacks are changing, and I mentioned some, I said DOS attacks. DOS attacks are not new. The first and largest service attacks are not volumetric. They were DOS attacks, where I take down a key piece of infrastructure that's in line to the internet. If I take down your external router or your external firewall, and it's in line, you're still down. So that's come back. Encrypted attacks are more common today. The other thing are pulse attacks, where and it's really not changing really so much how you would protect if you were in general, a general company in a let's say if you were a university. I'm not sure that you might have the same urgency to add layers of protection, because like I say, I've got the general protection for the most common attacks. But the problem is with hospitals that doesn't work. Again, it's a ransomware attack and people die. So we're starting to see a layered approach where I have to have volumetric protection. I need to consider an on-premise device which can see encrypted attacks, which can see, and encrypted, I don't mean SSL, because a number of the providers will say, well, we can see SSL attacks. You could, but you couldn't see, let's say, an IPsec attack. You couldn't see, when you deploy cloud, you can deploy cloud always on or swing. A swing type architecture, the bad actors have realized how to actually use this as a way to degrade your service. We'll attack you for 5 minutes, wait for you to swing, stop the attack, start again in an hour when you've brought your traffic back online. And with the swing architecture, you pay for every minute that you're actually being defended. So we see the world, it's not so much that hospitals have a different methodology, it's that the ramifications of not solving the problem are higher.
And I think on top of that too, you have the immediate one, the obvious one, right? Like, if you're under attack, you lose access to the records, you lose access to, your IoT equipment's no longer going to be able to communicate with the internet. The vast majority of what you're operating with is IoT, right? But the thing we're finding in a lot of these attacks is not only is there a damage from that, but you also run into every physician and nurse, is trained on operating from these EMRs, operating off the web, operating off of portals, right? So when these things go down and become inaccessible, they're now forced to go back to, reverting to paper, which is not something they're trained on, right? So you find in these events that simple things like someone had bad handwriting and, had to write a prescription for the first time in their life and overprescribe someone, right? Like all sorts of the stuff you wouldn't think about before. Once you're transitioning to paper, suddenly creates a, exponential threat of the loss of life there, because you're asking the healthcare workers to use processes they don't understand or are familiar with, even though it should seem obvious, right? It's just not the world they live in anymore, right? They're not asked to, they don't get trained on paper in medical school. They're not asked to do it from a day-to-day perspective. So in a crisis, you're now suddenly asking them to completely upend how they do things. And, the ramifications of that end up being, way greater than just a simple attack up front.
That's great insight. And I like how you said earlier, you talked about the reconnaissance, right? Like it speaks to something that's very calculated, right? That the attackers, they know these things, right? They've already taken these things into account. So it just seems all the more dire for a healthcare organization, really any organization, but specifically healthcare as we're speaking to today, to have a smart protection in place or some sort of protection in place to stop these sorts of things and to see it before it happens. So I want to pivot the conversation to you, Daniel, to how Myriad360 specifically helps healthcare organizations defend against DDoS. And maybe you could talk about how you partner with security solutions, leading providers to help an organization such as Mainline Health.
So there's really three or four areas. So one, we do try and take a holistic approach to availability, and availability has a number of different areas, but DOS is part of that. And we say, look, if you're gonna invest, or you've already invested somewhat in DDoS protection, we need to make sure that we have, it's almost like a good, better, best approach. If you don't have anything, let's put a solution in place that protects you from 90% of common attacks. Because the worst thing we need is some person or some organization that's really not very educated goes and buys a standard Mirai botnet and sends it to you, and then takes you down. We want to make sure that people are protected from that, because you have to, in order to say you've done your due diligence, you need to take care of the 90%. Then we say to people, if you've already got that, we need to take the next step and add on some solutions. Ideally, we need to have something to protect you from your layer 7 attacks. You've got a lot of external facing applications. So how do we protect you from a layer 7 attack? And how do we protect you from more modern targeted attacks that are targeting devices or external IPs and or encrypted attacks, things that you can see, potentially even. And I haven't seen a lot of these, but I have a hospital group I'm working with that just the end of last year actually had an internal attack over IPsec. So the DDoS came from inside their own environment. And as you get these larger and larger hospital groups, it's going to be something I think we'll see more and more often. It's not unusual to see or medical institutions that now have more than 100 facilities. If you consider the internal bandwidth that they have on their WAN, you can see how they could be DDoSing themselves. Add to that some of the things where it makes it a ripe target, where you've got medical devices that can't be patched. So the ability to get in is the risk. The risk footprint is higher for medical institutions because of medical devices and FDA compliance. And if I can figure out how to, and if I'm thinking about it, that means the bad actors have thought about it. If I can look at that and then use a solution which actually does an attack from my own devices or my own environment, which will completely bypass most of the cloud SaaS offerings that we have for DDoS protection. So we start talking about what's the most likely thing we need to protect against. You have to do it because you have to say the due diligence. And how do we layer that down to protect you more? And then on top of that, then you talk about the auxiliary things as, a lot of DDoS solutions, it's not one size fits all. You buy it and it'll protect you. Again, the 90% solution protects you from 90% of the 90%. But your traffic is unique. Kevin mentioned earlier, they saw like volumes and traffic, but it's not a DDoS attack, but it's increase in volume. If you don't know that and you haven't seen it, the first day you see it, you could block it. You might block it. So you have to be able to tune your devices. And I'm seeing more and more people, if they're not doing this layered approach, are actually having to use solutions that will test the DDoS solutions and then help them tune them. Those are very costly. And you may need to be able to do it, but I think you'd be better off using a layered approach, which interacts together. So when you see something on-prem, it can talk to the cloud, automatically make the changes you need. Usually, if you can have a managed service around it, it sounds funny that you would need a managed service for DDoS, but it really, especially as you add in layer 7, it's not a set and forget.
Yeah, and Daniel, you're talking about there too, right? The with like the 90% of the 90% of the 90%, right? There's still the door is open theoretically for something to get through. And especially in healthcare, you're running into situations where you have equipment that is FDA certified or FDA regulated, right? So that means you're fully and functionally unable to either touch pieces of equipment or parts of your network. So you just have these vulnerable areas that you can't do anything about, right? So you just have this hot, like Windows 95 box sitting on a CAT scanner that was 30 years ago, right? That you can't do anything about. So you need to find workarounds and understand how to protect that. But in the end of the day, you still have devices that these manufacturers put on your network that are inherently insecure. So as a result of that, we've been taking we've been approaching this the downtime of threat from this as an inevitability, right? We're functionally saying like at some point this is going to happen. We can I want to throw as many protections as I possibly can in front of it, but like we can't. At the end of the day, we need to be prepared just in case that one wild scenario occurs where someone sneaks in. So we've been actually taking the hospitals down a floor at a time to test the healthcare workers in the event of an outage, right? So we'll say, all right, this floor, no longer has internet connectivity for 2 hours. That's to get them used to going to paper, but also, impressing the real implications of this on them, right? Like, this is why you need to take data security seriously. This is why you need to make sure you understand how to work when the lights are off.
That's fascinating. So Kevin, would you say you're sort of taking inventory of potential costs and ramifications that we've been talking about? So you're sort of taking that into account, and then when you're speaking to a solutions provider, you're bringing that up with them. Is that fair to say?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Because you need to understand that there's a few different pieces of this as well, right? Like the data has to be parsable, right? So like we were talking about earlier, right? Like being able to take the data from, it may or may not be a DDoS, but we're able to understand what our traffic looks like and how it's shaped and that sort of thing. But you also need to make sure that your relationship with the provider is strong, right? It's got to be someone you can trust, because they are your backbone, right? There's, implicitly they are the safety net for your network, right? So in this realm, I feel like relationship with your provider in this is enormous, right? It can't just be like, I don't know, they're our ISP, let's just do it, right? Like it's got to be more than that, right? It's foundational to everything you're doing.
I love that. So Daniel, I want to get to why Myriad360 partners with Corero, but I do have a few more follow-up questions for you, Kevin. So, what keeps you up at night? Within your role, what is causing agita or anxiety, and what would bring you peace of mind around providing a DDoS solution vendor?
Was that Daniel or I? Sorry.
That's for you. That's for you.
Okay, apologies. My 2-year-old keeps me up at night, but on top of that, it's making sure that our relationship is in a place where we can rely on them to both perform the blocks we need and also alert us, right? Like there's an implicit fear given the magnitude of this, right? And given how much you're relying on a third party to protect your network, right? That you have to trust. So I think it's that, right? It's okay, I trust this provider, but what if something happens, right? So I think it's that, like it's the breakdown of communication that is the part that would scare me.
And how important is, you've talked about it within your own, I guess, organization, but how important is resiliency or redundancy to the solution?
Enormous, right? So it's both, technologically, right? So making sure that you have, the solution in place to handle an attack, but also, theoretical backup plans you can handle, you can implement technologically, but it's also, I think, the soft skills piece of this as well, right? So making sure that in the event of an attack, you have what your response planned, people know what they're going to do, you have communications lined up, right? It's all stuff you need to have done ahead of time that you can't rely on. You're not going to have time in a crisis to, coherently put a thought together to address this sort of thing.
Yeah, right on. All right, so Daniel, as I said, I'm curious to know why Corero. What specific benefits? What takes you to the market with Corero? Why do you have confidence in Corero's solution?
So, as an organization, the relationship predates me to some extent. As one of our large partners is Juniper, and there's been a relationship between Corero and Juniper for a long period of time. But beyond that, we like flexible solutions, right? There's not a one size fit all. You can like a solution, but if you can only deploy it one way, that's not ideal. We like that you have virtual appliances, you can do inline, you can do cloud, you can leverage infrastructure that somebody already has using, so you can do the discovery and the initial block and then send flow spec out, so you can push the protections out to the edge of an existing network. And on top of that, Myriad, when I describe Myriad, I don't describe us as a reseller. You've got resellers, lots of people can sell products, and you have integrators. And the word integrator is overused, but today more so than ever, I think it actually means something, because everything I buy today has to work with other things. Everything I buy has an API. So we focus on selling things that are easy to use and that we can integrate into a greater solution set. And we've had a lot of, the support, the product itself and the support available from Corero are exceptional, including the fact, and to be honest, is that the managed services component that come with the solution, so that you're helping to jointly manage it, that takes a load off me, and it usually takes a load off my clients. Because the problem with something like a DDoS solution, it's not something I touch every day. I set it up, and hopefully I'm not touching it frequently. And so this idea where you're going to have people who are well rounded and up to date on how to use the product all the time. When I touch it just a handful of times a year, hopefully, it's not realistic. That's why I like having the solution that has a backstop with it. On top of that, to be fair, over the last 5 years, when DDoS first came out, you had a couple of manufacturers who made DDoS appliances. Then you had people who made services for DDoS and DOS. The number of people who make appliances today that I would consider tier one, there's 3, maybe 4 players in the space. And a lot of those players have lost focus because they make cloud solutions offerings as well. I like the fact that you're not competing with your partners who are offering DDoS as a service and also making appliances that allow me to offer a layered approach, but where I've got an environment where if you miss it here, you'll catch it there, kind of a layered security approach. So that's just some of the reasons. I could go on for more, but that's some of the reasons we like working with.
What does any of that mean? Thank you, Daniel. What does any of that mean to you, Kevin? Like when he speaks about flexibility and the sort of the adaptive nature and the fully managed aspect of, does that have value to you?
Yeah, unquestionably, right? Because I mean, I think that speaks back to the trust I was talking about in the relationships. Like that lends credence to that, right? Like if you have with that flexibility, you're able to, you'll have a better understanding of your environment, you'll have a better understanding of your data, which then will allow you to make more informed decisions, understand what's happening better. I think the other piece of this too is if you look at who's perpetrating these attacks, the scary ones and the ones that, we're often seeing, targeting healthcare, appear to be like nation state backed, right? So you need a service provider in place that can withstand that. And echoing Daniel's comment, I think the players in that space are pretty low.
Very good. So I want to move on to sort of like the future, and this is to both of you. What do you, as we know that the threats are always evolving, we've kind of talked about that and the different styles of attacks, but what do you see on the horizon, specifically with healthcare as I guess, regulations change and things? Is there anything on your mind or sort of as you're thinking to prepare for the future for protection?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the healthcare industry right now is struggling financially, right? Just, across the board is a lot of, you see it post-COVID, it's just been, you're seeing a lot of reduction in revenue and profits across the board, which is then creating greater strains on, security infrastructure and security teams to do more with less. So I think in light of that, in light of the increasing attacks, I think, the having automation in place and having the ability to programmatically handle some of these attacks is enormous, right? So the ability to, when you're faced with an attack, you're under attack, you're able to parse that data, send the data elsewhere, chop it up, and push it into other tools as well to effectuate blocks. I think it's going to be enormous, and only going to increase in importance as time goes on and the industry struggles continue.
How do you stay up to date, Kevin?
You don't. No, it's kidding. A lot of it, a lot of industry groups, right? HISAC, a great one, right? I also think it's important to stay connect. Governments, like the CSAPBIs of the world, right? They're always tremendous resources. Also, the connecting locally, right, with other CISO groups, especially other healthcare providers in your area, I think is enormous, right? Because you're probably facing similar concerns and threats. If one is hit, we've seen the others are not far behind them, right? So being able to have good communications with your system's competitors, right? But you have to treat them as colleagues, and work together and try to address some of these issues.
What about you, Daniel? You got anything that you see on the horizon?
So, I mean, probably the biggest topic in and around all IT today, AI.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, AI, especially in hospitals, AI is a double-edged sword. AI changes the whole premise of how I deal with DLP, and hospitals have been leaders in how to deal with PII data, but AI is changing that a little bit because of the ways you could query the types of data I need to protect. But on the other hand, using things like AI to help me expedite my ability to respond to things with people who are maybe not using a tier 1 person now having the ability to respond to a tier 3 potential ticket. That is one of the ways. Tying into that is there's new architectures which are allowing me to look at changing costs. If you take, in one of those spaces would be a very big expense is SIEM, collecting logs. Hospitals have to collect logs, and unlike many institutions, sometimes they have to Some of those logs I have to keep for 6 years. There's a cost for keeping those logs. What I tend to find myself doing is keeping logs in multiple places, because I'll have my firewall system. It will collect logs. My EDR will collect logs. Then I send those logs into a central place, traditionally, which is my theme, which then collects the same logs, but I haven't got rid of the other logs. Then I have my performance monitoring, my network monitoring. So we start to see solutions that help us to rationalize that, send only the logs that are required, only the parts of the logs that are required, have allowed me to do out of band storage, if you like, on cheaper storage. And we also even have now solutions that are looking at really this architecture that came out of the data world, because we're talking about data, where instead of having centralized stores, I'm having logically connected stores where I may not have to bring all the logs in. Because even today, if you talk to somebody like Kevin and I say, have you got every single log in your SIM? You got the most valuable and most likely places to cache something, but you can't afford to have everything. When you start looking at distributed architecture, I can. So I can also increase my coverage, reduce my costs, and tie AI on top of that to not just help with response, but actually, a few minutes ago, Kevin was talking about going floor by floor and asking people to go through what would they do in the event they lost connectivity or lost access to systems. In IT, we have these things that you have to have a run book. What happens in the event of X? But somebody has to build the run book. Using AI to build what the response would be and then helping you to actually act on that response is, I think, something we're going to see more and more commonly.
That's brilliant. Well, guys, look, time has flown and we've had an amazing discussion. Do either of you have any parting words for our audience or anything else you want to say before we close out? Any parting words of wisdom from either of you?
I don't think I've ever said anything wise in my life, Michael.
No, I think the whole discussion has been informative and wise. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really just, it treats this with the gravity of commands, right? Like this represents an existential threat to your system, both from loss of life, loss of reputation. And, it's an easy thing to overlook, or it's an easy thing to, try to put a patchwork solution in. But I truly think that having, partnering with someone great, working through, the solution, someone that can actually handle the scale of attack we're seeing is absolutely enormous and should be the backbone of your infrastructure.
Couldn't agree more. What about you, Daniel? Anything else?
I'd say, DDoS is part of availability. Backups are part of availability. Mm-hmm. Yes, we want to stop people from stealing our data. That's important. But at the end of the day, we also need to, almost more important, we need to make sure that we can keep running as an organization, especially in the medical space. So don't forget to focus on availability. In some cases, it should almost be more important than stopping people from being able to steal data. I have to have my data available to save lives.
That's amazing. That's what we preach here at Corero. Service availability is everything. But guys, I want to thank you both for your time. Kevin, Daniel, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to have a conversation with us. This has been illuminating, it really has. And to those who are watching, you can, if you didn't catch it live, you'll be able to watch this on Bright Talk. We'll be sharing it on YouTube as well. We want you to not hesitate to reach out to Corero. You can speak with a specialist directly off of our website and reach out to us should you have any questions about DDoS protection. Kevin, Daniel, thank you again. It's been amazing. You guys have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take care.